Brady Reynes here. This month, we're jumping into another hot topic: tax reform, national debt, and what history can teach us about the road ahead. Markets have been glued to Washington all year long. After a debate dominated by tariff talk, attention has shifted to a new tax bill making its way through the Senate. And with it, an age-old debate is back. Do tax cuts really grow the economy? And if so, what's the formula for successful tax reform?
Let's rewind. U.S. tax policy has evolved dramatically over the course of our nation's history. From the first income tax of 3 to 5% during the Civil War to a top marginal rate of 94% during World War II, it's fair to say that our tax rates have varied greatly over the course of history. Lofty marginal rates remained in place after World War II until Johnson's tax cuts in the 1960s.
President Johnson has some words of congratulations for congressional leaders who spurred the tax bill through both houses as he prepares to sign it into law. Less than 6 hours after final passage, the presidential signature makes the $11.5 billion tax cut a reality, the biggest such reduction in history.
The economy responded to these cuts with solid growth. In the years following, tax revenue actually rose thanks to an increase in economic activity despite lower tax rates. President Reagan's 1981 tax cuts slashed rates across the board. They also came with a cost. Government debt nearly tripled during his 8 years in office, the largest proportional increase in modern political history. So what can we learn from history? Tax cuts can and have been effective at spurring economic activity, but only with certain pre-existing conditions and proper execution. First, pre-existing rates need to be high. The cuts need to relieve pre-existing pressure felt by current policy. For example, the corporate tax rate was 52%, and individual rates ranged from 20 to 91% prior to the Revenue Act of 1964, enacted by President Johnson. Second, the economy should need the stimulus. Both Johnson and Reagan's cuts came at a time of relatively high unemployment and stagnant economic growth. Third, cuts should be broad-based. They should put money back in the pockets of all taxpayers. While high earners typically see the largest gross dollar benefit, lower income earners tend to have a higher propensity to spend, spurring economic activity. Finally, cuts need to be meaningful in size to actually impact economic behavior. Reagan's 1982 cuts reduced federal revenues by almost 3% of the total size of the U.S. economy, making it the largest tax cut in American history. The idea behind cutting taxes is that we can grow the economy by lowering the tax burden, in turn encouraging investment, savings, creating jobs, and ultimately growing the economy. Size matters in giving the taxpayers the confidence to make financial decisions.
Johnson and Reagan's tax cuts met all of the conditions that Kirk just talked about. However, the more recent tax cuts from President Bush's presidency to President Trump's have had a more muted impact because they were smaller, more targeted at corporations, and came during a relatively strong economy. So let's try to apply these conditions to today's bill. Let's start with the tax rates. A quick comparison of other developed economies shows that the U.S. tax rates are near the low end of global tax rates, and absolutely lower than decades past. It's difficult to argue that tax rates are high and that they should be reduced at all. Second, tax reform needs to take place during a struggling economy. However, at this time, our economy is strong. Corporate earnings are at a record high, unemployment rates are low, and the market is at near record highs. Third, the tax cuts must be broad-based, where all taxpayers receive some sort of benefit. However, the bottom 20% of earners may see no benefit, and maybe even a slight decrease in after-tax income if this bill does go into effect. The top 20% of earners, however, would see a 3 to 5% boost in after-tax income. Finally, the tax breaks offered by the bill are big. So much so that the Tax Foundation estimates a $4.1 trillion revenue loss over 10 years, which is about 1.3% of the GDP annually. While it's hard to say how much positive economic impact the proposed tax reform will have, one underlying concern remains. How will the decrease in tax revenue impact our growing level of national debt? The U.S. national debt is now $37 trillion, or 122% of the GDP, the highest since World War II. And on May 16th, Moody's downgraded the U.S. credit rating, citing rising debt and interest costs. Meanwhile, 30-year Treasury yields just topped 5%, a level we haven't seen consistently since before the 2008 financial crisis. That could signal optimism or fear of inflation and fiscal instability.
As always, we'll be watching the data, the markets, and the decisions coming out of Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for your continued confidence and trust. If you found this video helpful, feel free to share it with a friend. Thanks so much.